Welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. On today's episode, we are building our Attention Economy Navigator for the month of March 2026. The goal of Block and Build has always been to help organizers figure out what's happening, how people are responding, and get a sense for what's working out there in the world. The Attention Economy Navigator is our way of visually mapping some of the most and least talked about news stories of the month and help our audience orient to what's worth your attention and what could use a little less. Here's how the Navigator works. My panel of guests, who you will meet in a moment, will work with me to plot some of the most discussed news stories from the past month onto a two-dimensional graph, reflecting where we think they fall on a spectrum of signal to noise on one axis and conspiracy to reality on the other. If you'd like a visual, you can always watch this episode on YouTube or find the final graph in article form on our website. To explain this a little bit better, let's take a trip back to high school geometry and envision a standard XY graph. On the x-axis, we're measuring signal versus noise, with high signal being furthest to the right and high noise being furthest to the left. Noisy stories are those with little meaning. They're part of the chatter, but they aren't going to stick with us, and they don't mean much to our long-term media and political environment. Contrast that with high signal stories, which have deep, long-term implications and impact on our world. Then on the y-axis, we're measuring consensus reality versus conspiracy theory. High reality stories are those that are really happening. These are based in hard reporting, they're rooted in consensus reality, and are observable in the world. High conspiracy stories are those which are a little more speculative. They might be actual conspiracy theories, or they might just be based in some broad conjecture. This leaves us with four quadrants. The top right quadrant is high signal and high reality. These are the stories that are meaty and demand our attention, and which are both happening and mean something. Those that are high noise and high conspiracy fall on the bottom left and probably deserve a little less attention, even if people can't stop talking about them. High noise, high reality stories are things that we don't think will last the media cycle, while high signal and high conspiracy stories are a particularly interesting category in our times. These stories might be driven by conspiracy theory, but they tell us something meaningful about our world. The finalized graph plot is linked in the show notes and can be found on Convergence's website for you to follow along. You can also pop over to watch this episode on our YouTube channel, where producer Josh helps us lay out the graph in real time. To help build this month's Attention Economy Navigator, I am joined by two comrades who think a lot about movement strategy and also care a lot about political narratives, the internet, and why we are the way we are. Joining me today are founder of Creator Congress, Rynn, and the National Press Secretary for the Working Families Party, Ravi Mangla. Together, they also co-publish the Substack newsletter Signal Break, which is all about agitating, disrupting, and challenging the prevailing orthodoxy around how we communicate and charting a new way forward. Rynn, Ravi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
We've collected some headlines for discussion today. And so the way this will work is I'll call on each of you to talk a little bit about your story, and then we'll put about 5 minutes on the clock where we can talk amongst ourselves and figure out where we want to place it, things we notice about it. Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, results from the Illinois primary came in last night. So Rynn, maybe we should start with this story about dark money in politics.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a really interesting one, especially Creator Congress was founded with the idea of organizing content creators. So content creators getting involved in primaries in this way felt really important to talk about, especially in the article. One of the content creators didn't know who Kat was, who was the main target of this $1,500 spend. And I just think it brings up a really good conversation, even though it kind of dips into the conspiracy about what is dark money? How is it being used? How is it being used specifically with content creators? And there was a lot of dark money in this race, or money being spent from, large lobbying groups in kind of nefarious ways. So I really wanted to bring that story forward because I think it had, I don't know that it necessarily changed the outcome of the race, but I thought it brought up a really good conversation about disclosures and what we should expect and what we maybe shouldn't expect, right? With money in politics is going to come some level of obfuscation of people who are spending.
Yeah, I recall reading in the New York Times this morning also that AIPAC spent a lot of money using sort of shell packs that are not labeled as AIPAC. That that's also a piece of this, is that they're sort of toxic brand right now, and so I think it's interesting to see just how like it's becoming harder to track these things, and that definitely feels
Yes.
conspiratorial to me. Could you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about like the Illinois 9th district primary in particular, who the candidates were, and kind of like why this particular race was important?
Yeah. So the top three candidates were the ones that came out in the top three last night after the primary were Daniel Viss, Pat Abgazale, and Laura Fine. Laura Fine was the APAC chosen candidate. Daniel Biss and Kat took like integrity pledges about not taking PAC money. And then Bushra Amwala was the candidate who was considered kind of the progressive spoiler. So there was a lot of drama towards that end as well. This particular article was covering spending against Cat, and nobody knew which candidate was behind this spend. And the spend was basically a like open call to a bunch of creators, a brief that didn't actually say in the beginning of the brief that they were targeting Cat, but as you read the brief, it's like all of it is clearly a targeted attack. So, and then one of the creators came out saying like, I didn't know who she was. I'm so sorry. Took down the post, and it just. And they were not even from Illinois, right? So it's also just this outside influence of people that are unfamiliar with it, like even outside of the state, not just this district. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I guess for some of our audience who may not be paying so much attention to the creator economy, could you also talk a little bit about like what it means that these like dark money entities are like basically paying for people to like make SponCon for
sure.
like
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think coming out of the 2024 election, a lot of the news coverage has been that we've lost trust in legacy news. Like a lot of Trump's credited wins were based on his ability to leverage his relationships with content creators or influencers. And, in the last 2025 into 2026, campaigns, policy groups, lobbyists have started to turn towards content creators who have maybe more of a parasocial relationship with their audience as communicators, right? So rather than relying on a press release or a New York Times story or an op-ed or whatever, they're leaning into this nebulous area that has no real FCC regulations to pay content creators to talk about their issues. And in a lot of cases, that's okay, right? Like these content creators are acting like citizen journalists. They are out there informing their audiences about really important events, and they also believe in the people that they're supporting. We saw this a lot with Jasmine Crockett had like a really large supportive creator base, and a lot of that was earned. They just believed in her cause. But when it gets into like non-disclosures and paying for things that people don't believe in, then we get into really dicey area of like what is real, what is false, what is election interference. And that just isn't really Wild West, an unregulated space that we are all trying to kind of figure out.
Yeah, no, it seems pretty wild. I guess for starters, where do we think that this should land on the Attention Economy Navigator graph?
Well, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I kind of
tricky one.
Robbie, where do you? I'm curious, Robbie, where do you think it lands? Because we haven't really talked so much about it.
I really think this story feels endemic of kind of a larger thing that we saw in Illinois too. It feels like a bellwether in an unconventional sense of like, as you were talking about, the APAC obfuscation, the obfuscation of where this creator spending was coming from. We saw tiny shell packs that were funneling money. And what we're going to see is, crypto, obviously pro-Israel interests. These have become extremely polarizing, and they're going to find ways to obfuscate their spending like we have not seen before. And candidates with such a gray zone as creators are right now, it's not something that was clearly anticipated by the FEC. So we're going to see really unorthodox and circuitous ways that people are funded to oppose a candidate. So I think it's really interesting looking at that election, the kind of tactics that were used, and that the way that money was funneled was extremely scary and unorthodox. And it's going to be something that we're going to see a lot more of. I don't know. I think Signal makes a lot of sense, but I don't know where it fits on the reality to conspiracy axis. That's where I need a little help.
Yeah, I agree with you that this is like a high signal thing, that it's like this is something that we are certain to see more of this year.
But I think it's also important to point out that this was not a bad result. AIPAC had to move the goalposts after this race to say that they were all about defeating Kat and Bushra, when really they spent against Daniel Biss. They wanted to uplift Raja in the Senate race. Their chosen picks did not succeed, so they are claiming false wins after this election to kind of save face, and we should feel encouraged by the results.
Yeah, that was the other thing that was interesting in the Time story, was like they noted that AIPAC actually spent more money in the races that they lost than they did in the races that they won, which feels like a data point for sure.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to suggest that this maybe goes like just below the sort of like x-axis, because like it is real, but it also feels conspiratorial in the sense that like the system is kind of being abused here a little bit, right? That like the existence of creators as like a place that you can spend dark money is like a loophole, that it makes sense that it's a loophole because it's kind of a new thing, but then it's also being exploited in this way that feels kind of sketchy and like not, I don't know. And it just seems like the kind of thing that the FEC is not set up to like catch up with very quickly, even under the best of conditions.
Absolutely not. And I think Rynn pointed out something really interesting, the way the creators are acting like citizen journalists and citizen investigators. And, you know, AIPAC could have never anticipated the number of everyday people who are using their platform to track these PACs to find out where money is going. And despite the attacks on the news industry, we are seeing news contract in a way that we've never seen it before. I feel almost more aware of where money is flowing and where it's coming from because of how many people have kind of taken on this role as citizen investigator.
Yeah, no, there is something really like, I really like this, in some ways, like very optimistic read that like people are willing to ask these questions and are open to this conversation in a way that it does feel like something has changed in that way. And that's kind of cool. Any last thoughts on this, Rynn?
No, I think this is like a good place to end up. I think conspiracy doesn't really necessarily mean that it's false, and it's good for us to be questioning where money is coming from. And Ravi was saying, like, citizen journalists it's almost like open sourcing the news, which has its like upsides and downsides, but it's really interesting to see how accountability has changed and how it's changing.
Ravi, you sent us a story about whether or not the moderate Democratic voter really exists anymore, to keep us on this sort of like midterms topic, that like this is clearly one of the things that people are freaking out about and trying to understand. So can you tell us a little bit about this polling and this analysis and what you think it means?
Yeah, so it's a New Republic story, and New Republic took a pretty large sample size of people. I believe it was 2,400, testing moderate voters, not on the kind of wedge issues that a lot of people have been polled on lately, like whether they want to defund the police or whether they want to abolish ICE, but asking them about some real like kitchen table economic issues. And what they found is, the self-proclaimed moderate voters strongly support taxing the rich. They feel like Democrats are too timid when it comes to going after large corporations and raising taxes on the very wealthy. And I think, coming out of the past election, there was this, battle that was kind of brewing between economic populism and whether the party needs to recalibrate to the center. And from what I can see, that question has almost been settled by voters. That we're seeing that kind of economic populism that's being espoused by people, and not just on the left. I think about Zoran Mamdani running on the affordability agenda, and now you see every single candidate from left to center running on affordability and talking about it like they invented the idea. He talked about freeze the rent. Then you see Mikey Sherrill talking about freezing utilities. So that has become what feels like the dominant strain among candidates. Yet we still see a pundit class that is hammering the idea that wokeism is dying, that Democrats need to moderate. But that is directly at odds with what we're seeing in poll after poll and what we're hearing from people on the ground. And I think that we will see in this midterm that every candidate will have to answer for the question of economic inequality and affordability. And groups like Third Way that want to preserve a centrist neoliberal consensus don't have an answer to this. What is their response to massive inequality, to the affordability crisis? Beyond beating up on the left over pronouns, over culture war issues, what are they actually offering as a solution to this problem that everybody feels and sees in their life? So I thought it was very interesting, the kind of, like the floor falling out from under this neoliberal consensus that has been dominant for so long. And even the most moderate members of our big tent are saying we need to tax the rich, we need to go after corporations, we need to challenge this kind of economic hierarchy.
I have just something to add to that I think is really interesting, especially for the project we're doing here of kind of mapping things out on a grid. I saw this content creator and he was mapping out, it was to the far left, there was, left cultural issues, far right culture issues, and then left-wing populism, right-wing populism. And if you actually map out standard voters on this, every grid is taken except for this bottom area where it's high left cultural issues, high right-wing economic issues. And yet that's where most pundits in the Democratic Party tell us to run. And there are no voters. There are no voters in that box.
Yeah.
Right? They're either very far right culturally and in their economic stance, very far right culturally and very high in their economic populism, or they're far left culturally and far left in their economic populism. But this far right, far left culture, that in between doesn't exist, and it's basically where Kamala Harris ran her campaign. So I think
the only people in that box are Chuck Schumer's imaginary family, the Bears.
That's exactly right. And it's corporations, though, right? It's where corporations feel really comfortable because they're able to market to the broadest population of people to buy their products, to invest in their companies, and they also don't want taxes and don't want any kind of accountability or regulation. So that's who exists in that box, and that's who we run our campaigns for, and it's clearly not working.
Yeah, and in spite of Citizens United, corporations still don't vote.
They still don't vote. Exactly. They're still a minority, right? A minority group. And tailoring all of our elections and all of our talking points to them is clearly failing. And I think we're seeing that in many of these elections, from Graham Plattner to Zoran Mamdani to Kat overperforming so well in her race.
So where do we think this polling lives? I mean, it seems like there is a signal here, and I'm curious how strong we feel like the signal is, I guess.
I would put it somewhere in the middle of signal noise and high reality. And I would say that because I think that there is clearly something real about how we're seeing voters shift right now. And that's something that we need to be paying attention to. And that feels born out of actual evidence, polling, research, concrete things. But in terms of signal noise, I think what we are going to see is a lot of candidates picking up these talking points in a hollow way. We're going to see, as we've seen before, the kind of manipulation or the trappings of economic populism, yet underneath that, people peddling the same kind of neoliberalism. So I think it lands somewhere between the signal noise, and I think there are going to be a lot of candidates where people see through their bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, that feels really related to the creator stuff we were just talking about, in the sense that we're going to have these independent people putting some scrutiny on folks in a different way. I cannot help but also think about how I think a lot of the economic populist stuff that is about the rich paying their fair share, about skepticism, about the sort of consolidation of so many things in the economy, is related to the way that our media environment is changing, right? That the consolidation of the media environment is a piece of this. I think we're going to be seeing this playing out in different ways. I would maybe put it slightly into the signal zone. It feels like something that feels concrete to me. But yeah.
I'm totally fine putting in the signal zone. I'm afraid of too many things in the reality and signal zone, so I wanted to push it a little bit.
Well, don't worry. I have a noise conspiracy story for you, which which is that the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, resigned this week over military strikes in Iran. And I initially, when his letter came out, he posted this letter on X, like a lot of these like MAGA like functionaries do. They love to post their statements on X first. It's a choice for sure. But it seemed like a lot of people forgot the part where this dude is like a far-right conspiracy theorist, and like a lot of the stuff underlying his thinking, which is very critical of Israel, is based in a sort of like Christian nationalist anti-Semitism, right? And so it's like one of these things where like I think for us who are like actually trying to make this country a functional democracy that is like welcoming and inclusive of everybody, we need to remember that sometimes these guys say the right things for the absolute fucking wrong reason, right? Like, and Joe Kent saying that there's no reason for the United States to attack Iran except for the fact that Israel wants to make war on Iran is like, there's some insight there, and also part of his motivation for pinning this 100% on Israel and on Netanyahu is that he is a raging fucking anti-Semite. And to me, it's the kind of thing where it's like it goes beyond a broken clock is right twice a day. It's like we actually have to like really pull these things apart carefully, because I think there's a way in which there's a certain kind of, the reason anti-Semitism is so sticky is because it is a cultural meme, right? Like deeper than just internet memes, it is a cultural meme that goes back in sort of like Western European culture for thousands of years. And so being able to be critical of that stuff and be like, I also think like saying that the only reason that the US attacked Iran is because of Israel is also just false. Like it doesn't acknowledge the fact that like the United States government does in fact make choices and people within it make choices, and it allows like Trump, it allows Hegseth and whoever to evade accountability for fucking war crimes, right? Like, and I think that like there's a way that this is really noisy in that way, that it's like, even if that was not Kent's intention, it is in the media environment allowing that stuff to be obfuscated in a lot of ways. So I do think it like belongs on the noise side of the signal noise axis, and I do think it kind of belongs in the conspiracy zone, in the sense that like I think that Kent actually believes this, right? Like I think he is representing his actual belief, but his actual belief is like completely shaped by the far right conspiracy theory world that he comes out of.
The enemy of your enemy is not always your friend.
Ding.
This was so fascinating to me too, because I was seeing a lot of left-leaning pundits be like treating this kind of like a gotcha. And then I spent way too much time monitoring right-wing spaces like Getter, Rumble, and Truth Social, whatever. So I went there to see how they were reacting. And they were just dragging him to hell because he was going against Trump. You know, like it wasn't working, but it was he was being treated like a war hero on our side who like defected. And it's like, no, like this guy is a terrible person. Also, like aligning ourselves with him is doing nothing to like actually move people on the other side. So why are we doing it? Yeah, I thought this story was really interesting. I think that's a good place for it to end up.
This is a very quick aside and a little bit off track, but I just learned it this weekend, and it's very fascinating that the former acting director of the CIA is now a Washington magician that you can book for birthday parties and special events.
What?
Yes.
Wait. I feel like I need more information about this. I'm like, wait.
Apparently, while he was a deputy director of the CIA, became acting director of the CIA under Bush, retired, and then like pursued his love of magic, and now runs a kind of like coalition of Washington magicians. You can find his website. You can book him for parties. Lots of pictures online of both him like behind the flag in his CIA pictures, right next to like him, you know, playing with cards or like pulling rabbits out of a hat.
Oh my God, that's incredible. I mean, God forbid a guy have hobbies, right? Like,
I feel better about him doing magic than running the CIA. So
you know, more guys who might be inclined to run the CIA should like take up some interesting hobbies that maybe
if we had encouraged Trump to do Broadway, he would be a Broadway star right now.
Look.
He would be in a much happier world.
it,
Men need hobbies.
right. It might be cringe, but it's better than war crimes, right? Like,
oh, better than war crimes. Yeah. Just embrace your cringe.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about Joe Kent, and that stuff about how the like right-wing social media is reacting to this is also really interesting, and I think says a lot.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested, Rynn, do you want to talk about the Texas Senate primary story?
Yeah, we can keep going. I mean, I think it's still kind of within the creator vein, but I think that one was really interesting to me. I mean, I love McKenna Kelly. And I kind of just hope she's wrong. Like I hope it's noise. I hope it's a conspiracy, but I don't know. I think some of this is about the choices we make in the next couple of cycles. But basically, the story was about James Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett in the Texas Senate primary, and how vicious some of the creator relationships got, to the point where they were making news, right? They were making like state and national news, and really coloring conversations about the primary. The most notable one being this content creator, Morgan, who had what the Tallarico camp says was an off-the-record conversation. She hasn't necessarily said that, where he apparently, according to her, referred to Colin Allred as a mediocre Black man. The Tallarico camp vehemently denied that. And now we just don't know, right? Like it's like kind of he said, she said. We don't know what the journalistic standards of this. So McKenna Kelly's claim in the piece is, or not claim, but just like her presumption of what might happen is that content creators will be this sort of liability in the future if we don't have some kind of standards dictating how they engage with candidates. And I worry about it, but as someone who like is a real creator advocate, I'm just watching the space with a lot of curiosity. There were things like they were calling for James Tallarico to denounce this amplifier account, this account that's just memes, called Rogue DNC. And it's like, it's very strange to think of a Senate campaign putting out a press release denouncing some social media account. It's just interesting, right? And I realize these are real tensions, these are real relationships and real people. How it moves voters, we don't know yet, right? I think there's some danger in saying that it's not real. There's some danger in saying that these things won't affect the voting base. I think we saw Kamala Harris say that in her race. And so it's like, what is that balance of like, how seriously do we take these relationships and these fights? Are they affecting the ground? I don't know. I think it's just like a really interesting question where like, depending on how we act, this could be reality in the next couple of cycles, or it could just be, something that rises and falls and has no real impact in the future. And I just don't know right now.
It's a tricky one to map.
It is kind of tricky to map. I know. It's like an interesting conversation. I think like the reality is that I think it did impact the race. I think because Colin Allred had to make a statement about it, right? He called out Tallarico. There was real impact and real harm, like for people feeling like Tallarico was not sensitive to race.
Right.
And like that had an impact. So there's reality, maybe reality and noise. It's like an interesting kind of bucket.
Well, what it reminds me of is back in, like, this is about over 10 years ago at this point, but like, just like all of the like weird fights that people were getting into on Twitter around like the viral trending, like social justice hashtags, and like the your slip is showing kind of moment where like all of these accounts that were like amplifying these social justice messages had actually been set up by kind of like, the dregs of like 4chan and stuff like that to sow like division between prominent people who are sort of building careers on top of these social justice hashtags. And like, I think the real, in a lot of ways we can look back at that time and be like, there was a lot of people who were like, this is silly, like it's not real, but there was a lot of real relational harm done in terms of like rupturing friendships, rupturing comradeships, economic harm done, especially to some of the Black women who are calling it out, that like there's sort of ripple effects of this kind of thing that like it's like hard to explain to people who are not terminally online what a big deal this stuff actually can be.
So I always reference this. There's a report from 2019. Ravi's going to laugh because I reference this report literally every time I talk to people. But it's a study out of Nebraska. It came out of the Senate hearings about Trump stealing the election in 2016, or Russian interference in 2016. And what they did was they mapped Russian interference in the 2016 election going back to 2013. And what they found, like, I think there's this kind of myth that's been created around there was no Russian interference. It was rampant. It was massive. Like, people went to prison over this. And it's actually really interesting how they did it, because often what it would be are these benign accounts that would have memes and like be really anodyne, like no politics in it whatsoever. And there would be slow introductions of politics, moving people into right-wing thought. But it wouldn't be like slowly telling people to vote for Trump. It'd be slowly telling people, like, I think non-citizens shouldn't vote, don't you? And it's like, no one's actually advocating for like non-citizens vote. We're advocating for like people to be able to become citizens, right? Like, there's this really interesting dynamic at play, these binary questions that they would ask that would slowly move people over. And I think there was such a, oh, that's just the online people. That's just the online world. We should ignore that. And clearly it was having these like massive real world implications. And I mean, Russia's been continuing and perfecting this for now close to like over a decade. And they've influenced elections in Romania and England. And like, I don't know, it's just something we really like. There should never be a point where we're like, oh, that doesn't matter. It's just online, right? I think people don't like understand how impactful that can be. And we have to be very careful.
Yeah. It's a big hobby horse for Rynn and I. We always talk about it is the notion of an online-offline divide. That our side often gets stuck in the mentality of these like this rigid wall between offline and online. And people no longer think of their lives in those terms. What they were watching online, they did not think of that as I'm experiencing my online life. Now I'm going to turn off and like go here. And they don't prize one over the other. And we need to think of our organizing in a more fluid way. It's not always about moving people from the online world to in person. It can move the other way around. We can also organize people in online space. We need to kind of evolve our thinking in how we approach that.
That feels a really important thing to point out, because I'm really interested in the ways that people are sort of like remaking offline third spaces, but like, and it's important. Like, I'm not going to pretend that it's not, that like finding people and connecting to people and kind of reinventing what a third space looks like post neoliberalism and post COVID, even though COVID's not over, right, is like still important. And I think about how all of our digital third spaces have really been basically like gutted by enshittification, by right-wing takeover, and by monopoly platform capitalism. And that like it is not a dissimilar issue to the third space problem offline.
It's not. And what we're seeing, and I tell a lot of groups that I consult with this, is like, focus on things where there are closed groups that you need to earn trust to get in those spaces. And don't go in with whatever you're trying to peddle and like just start talking about it. But like, really try to figure out like, where are the Facebook groups, where are the Reddit communities, where are the like Discords where your people are, and if you like try to build community there, because I really think people, with the enshittification, like are taking like leaving social platforms into like more closed spaces. And if you're not building there or building ways for people to find community there, you're missing like a massive amount. It's like it's the under the iceberg, right? We're focused so much on the tip and what we see every day, and there's this whole community that's trying to escape and find real trust online, and we can't miss that.
I feel like the story is well placed, like kind of close to the center, but definitely in the noise reality zone. Like it feels noisy in the sense that it's like, who knows what will happen next? But
yeah, exactly. I think it looks like in a good place to me.
Ravi, you have a story about data centers becoming this wedge issue in the midterms. And we've talked quite a bit about data center organizing on this show and in Convergence, and I find this to be very interesting. So tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a hot topic. There have been a lot of articles about it, and a number of articles talking about the way it has both shaped past elections and portends to shape the upcoming midterms. But I think what's really interesting about this piece is it talks about the kind of murky gray area and like the lack of clear political battle lines. And, in that Michigan gubernatorial, the Republican candidate outflanking the Dem candidate on the issue. And we're seeing that in a lot of races where sometimes the Dem candidate is better on the issue, sometimes the Republican candidate is better on the issue. Whether they actually follow through with it, whether the people that they're funded by shape their beliefs post-election, we don't have the answers to that. But I think that we see an issue that has not been claimed by either side. And that's what's really interesting to me. I think you talked about in a past episode, Michigan Democrats passing a tax break for data centers in 2024, Democratic trifecta passing that. And looking at the quotes in that piece, you have very wishy-washy talk from Democrats about how they are approaching data centers like, hey, maybe we should take a look at these, we should reevaluate, we should slow down. What that actually means in policy is very unclear. And I think that there is a huge opportunity right now. This is a realignment issue. It's one that in so many working class communities is bringing out both Democrats, Republicans, politically ambivalent people. And no party, no group is really seizing that I can see in a major way. Even our progressive movement is very slow to seize on the issue of data centers. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. One of which is professional class of people who work for nonprofits are often located in major American cities are not seeing the kind of like groundswell that is happening in places like rural Michigan, the upper Midwest, parts of
Virginia is apparently huge. Yeah.
Virginia is huge. Georgia. These are hot button issues outside of most major American cities. They're on people's mind. People do not like these data centers for all manner of reasons, not the least of which is rising energy costs. It ties into the affordability issue. And if Democrats do not seize on this in the midterm, somebody else will. And it's most likely the Republicans, even if it is rhetorical, even if it is purely rhetorical, they will find a way to capture the energy that's being created. And we have looked for that realignment issue specifically in those places where Democrats have lost a foothold over the past 20, 30 years. And this is the issue where I feel very strongly that there is an opportunity to win people back. But so far, it does not seem to be happening.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Where do you think this lives on our graph?
I put this one in pure signal reality, but I am also open to other ideas.
It feels that way to me too. I'm inclined to agree. I do think that, like, one of the things that I learned from that episode that you're referring to about with Michelle Martinez, Molly Sweeney, and Christy McGillivray is just like how they were able to, as environmental justice advocates, connect the concerns of rural, tend to be more conservative Michiganders to like more liberal voters in the city of Detroit who are like, there's a point of connection here across racial difference, across geography, that they feel like they have this like organizing like toehold that they have not had historically. And I feel like that's really like, there's something that's very hopeful to me about that, even though like the whole sort of fight about data centers is kind of, it feels also kind of grim because like the companies doing this have so much damn money. Like,
totally. So. They can just overpower, and we see it imposed, just being imposed on communities. And I think like that is the feeling to tap into, the feeling of like powerlessness, of being kind of bulldozed over by these huge corporations. And Rynn and I have talked to tons of organizations about the issue, and it's been tough to get people on board with the data center fight, but it's there. It's, it's being reported on. You interview people in the communities where these data centers are going in, and they are pissed off.
Yeah.
They are pissed off, and they're going to listen to somebody who is making sense around this. And I don't think either political party is kind of rising to the moment.
There's also this like false binary that we're being sold by Silicon Valley of like, well, if we want to win the AI wars, we have to build these data centers, which what we're finding from like East Asian countries and in Europe is not actually true. Like the regulations that they're facing are forcing them to be more clever about how they run their algorithms, actually creating better, more open source algorithms. So there's like a real chance to be smarter and better and actually ahead in like just making better AI if we actually regulate. So there's this, they're kind of forcing us into this choice that I think is false, and also, you know, making us sacrifice our planet for the greed and like false like snake oil salesmanship of the Sam Altmans of the world. And you know, I just think it's a lack of vision and future forward thinking. I literally saw there's something coming out of Singapore where they were like showing how they were going to use AI in governance structures, and like it was just so ahead of anything we're doing, and we're just not even like talking about how to be better about these things. And like I constantly hear the inevitability argument. It's like, sure, but like cars have seatbelts, right? Like we can't smoke on airplanes. Like there's all these rules and regulations in place when we're dealing with dangerous new technologies that like we're being sold is impossible with this, and it's just not true.
Great. I'm pleased with where we've landed here. My second story is about Cuba, because due in part to all of the stuff going on with Venezuela, all of the oil shocks happening because of war with Iran, and our ongoing blockade of Cuba, Cuba's currently experiencing an immediate and acute humanitarian crisis where like their grid has failed. They have no electricity. It is like dire and immediate, and the only thing Trump can talk about is taking over Cuba. And I'm just like, in some ways, I'm like, I struggle to really like talk about it just because it's so absurd. And it's also so vile that like these people who honestly have suffered for decades, for nearly a century under US blockade, right? Like are now being sort of like used as political football is not even the right word. It's sort of like a punching bag more than anything else. Like it feels like Cuba is being kicked while it's down, and the people who are paying the price are everyday people who live in Cuba. And I think that like, you know, Trump talking about taking the country as if like the reason that people are suffering there is not his own like illegal humanitarian like war crime actions, like is just, I don't know. It's one of these things that like when I think about it, I'm just like, I don't think this man has a plan for anything. He just like does things. He just reacts. And it's infuriating and it's heartbreaking. And it feels like something that's a really small thing on some level, but it also feels indicative of the kind of foreign policy that characterizes like the like Trump era, right? Like the kind of foreign policy he wants to do. Yeah, I don't know. It's a story that kind of bums me out, but I think it's worth talking about because frankly, I have not seen it talked about in a lot of media outlets aside from movement media. And I do think it feels like kind of a bellwether about where Trump really wants US foreign policy to be. How real it is, I have no idea. You know, it's the kind of, in terms of like the Trump like proposing that we take over Cuba, because like between Venezuela and Iran and whatever, it does seem like we're a little stretched thin. You know, like even though we are a declining empire, you know, we do have finite resources in this way, and like I don't know where on the reality to conspiracy axis to place it, but like it does feel closer into kind of the center regardless. Because in some ways, him being like, I want to take the country is like a bunch of bloviating noise. But the reality is like there is some real suffering happening because of the like knock-on effects of our frankly like, you know, criminal actions as a rogue state. So I don't know. It feels like in that way a little signally, but like closer to the middle.
I mean, I think the other signal that's really fascinating, I forget where I was reading this, but sort of the idea of Trump treating the Western Hemisphere as like his playground, like this sort of dividing up into like, okay, well, Russia will just take that. And like, we're just going to take this sort of like, I can do whatever I want within the Americas is sort of, I mean, we saw it with Maduro, we're seeing it with Cuba. Like that to me is like the signal here. And it's very scary and real. And yet like also, yeah, this feels like he can't actually do it. It almost feels like a weird gift to Marco Rubio in ways that I hate. And like, you know what I mean? Like just this kind of like it's gross. And it just also gives us so much insight into how they think about, you know, the global South and other worlds. And it's just, it is one of the more horrifying stories that's not getting covered. But I think this is like a good place.
Well, I was just going to say, it's making me think of another story that came out in the past week about Zambia and Trump threatening to withhold HIV medication and resources if they do not hand over minerals and resources that they have. And as you were saying, it's a level of kind of depravity, of crossing some kind of line that we have not seen crossed when it comes to foreign relations.
It also, I mean, and that's true too. This is from last year, but where they were withholding war aid in Ukraine because they wouldn't take up Starlink. I think it was like crazy, like corporate handouts, but on like a global scale. And it's not having it's the same way with Cuba. But again, it is like very insightful for us to watch, like how they are seeing their own foreign and domestic foreign policy, because it really mimics their domestic and also is dealing with a completely different set of realpolitik, and like it's very scary, especially watching with Iran. Like the consequences of that are devastating, and they have no idea.
Yeah, because it's not fundamentally about like making deals for the people who are in your patronage network, not actually for like really anything else. Like not even like.
Well, and Trump said like gas prices are good because people who own oil companies make money. So if they go up and they make money, that's good for America. And that is truly just like how he operates at like the lizard brain level. We've just never seen anything like it. I mean, someone was saying on Twitter, like we have a Watergate scandal a week, and like, or several, and we just can't even react in time. It's really disturbing.
Totally. Yeah, unfortunately in the reality signal quadrant, but there are definitely some conspiratorial elements of this story. I do feel like as we wrap up here, I do kind of want to spend a second and talk about this third story that you sent over, Rynn, about AI treating intelligence as like a utility that you can buy, which I feel like is really freaky. And there were a lot of like headlines about Sam Altman just like Sam Altmaning about this. But I'm interested to hear what you think about it, why you think it's important, and what we can learn from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bullshit. I think it's like technology, from what we've seen, ends up being often open source. This idea that he's just going to control it and turn on the intelligence spigot or turn it off, I think is pretty blustery and like not true, but that would not be surprising for Sam Altman. And I think, the other thing that was so interesting, especially about the specifics in the article I sent, is they compare intelligence to utilities, but they also say like water and electricity. And I just couldn't help but think like, oh, those should be public anyway. Like
right.
if we're talking about what AI should do for people, it should be a public utility. The idea that we would have to outsource our own intelligence to, which they stole, like it's like AI is stolen intelligence, right? And then we have to buy it back from them the same way that water is free, but now we have to buy it back from people. Like this just constant privatization of everything. I forget, I feel like there's a quote where like capitalism profits off of everything except your sleep, right? Something like that. And even that has become commodified in some ways, like with grind culture. So, it's just this extension into the commodification of everything. And that also relates back to like Colchi markets and poly market and how we're seeing the world as this like gamification and profit engine, and it just leaves no space for human beings. It leaves no space for people and leisure and just being a human in the world who actually has relationships. So I thought it was really funny in a lot of ways. Like I think he's just kind of a clownish figure, and the fact that he has so much power is devastatingly scary. But yeah, so it probably falls in like the conspiracy noise mostly because I just don't buy what he's selling. I have a feeling that if AI is going to develop in the future, we're going to be buying it from China. They're showing the most promise in their models. Like I think we're going to spend all this money. We're going to bank our entire economy on it, and the East is just going to steamroll us. That is my you've heard it here first prediction, which maybe is wrong.
Love
but,
a hot take.
Yeah, that's my separate take.
Well, I also found this sort of like soundbite from Altman to be really interesting, to be coming around the same time as, I don't know if you saw this 404 Media reporting about these like basically data cleaners in Africa being like, AI stands for African intelligence. And I was just like, oh, what you're metering is just like the sort of like both cognitive and emotional labor of people who we cannot see and we don't relate to because they're like Black people in Africa. Like, and I
almost put that piece in.
Yeah, it's such a good piece.
Choice.
Like, we will absolutely link it in the show notes, because I feel like people need to read it and like really understand the ways that like AI is not just like, yes, it is like harvesting all of our data, but it is also like, this is creating a weird, like this weird data pipeline that is like transcontinental, that is like sort of like inscribing colonial relationships between the developed world and the developing world. It's just like, there's just levels. There's levels.
And there was one other, I can't remember if it was in that 404 piece or I was just kind of reading about like going down a trail with that. But I was also reading about how the cleaners in Africa, the people that were like adding to this intelligence, were suffering immensely because of it. I mean, it was just like absolutely heartbreaking PTSD, like inability to be intimate with your partners, like because of some of the like things they were having them watch. I mean, it like just an absolute outsourcing of human misery. It reminds me of like Severance, you're like, I'm going to take all this idea and memory and just kind of like outsource it to these other places. And it was really like sobering article, I thought, and important for people who are really hardcore on the AI train to think through like, what actually is this? Like, why are you able to do the things you're able to do with this? And like, where does it come from? These like kind of, standard ethical pipelines don't exist for AI. It is all stolen. It is all harmful. And that is, those supply chains are really important to think about.
Yeah, I feel like Altman's pronunciations often belong in Noise and Conspiracy.
Like, unfortunately, it's real in the impact, but man,
because he has more money than God, therefore it's real in the impact. Like, well, I feel like we landed in a good place for this month's graph. Rynn, Ravi, thank you so much for making the time to graph some of these things with me. It's been, I feel like these conversations are always fun, but like a grim kind of fun, where it's like we do get to laugh, and also there are some moments of real yikes that we run across.
No, this was really fun. Thank you for having us.
Totally. Ravi, where can people find you on the internet if they want to, see more of your work, learn more about you?
I am on social media, at least for now, but I would direct people to Signal Break to follow Rynn and I's Substack. We post regularly a lot about technology, communications, and trying to puncture long-standing kind of dated ideas around organizing or left theory. So yeah, check it out.
Awesome. Rynn, any other places that folks can find you online?
Not unless you want to follow pictures of our kava poo. So my Instagram, if you're so inclined. But beyond that, I think Signal Break is a really good place for where we share like longer form thoughts.
He is a very handsome dog, though.
He's a good looking guy.
I mean, we all need cute animals in order to survive in this environment. My cat is an essential part of the Convergence team. So
absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you both so much. And I am sure that we will talk again soon.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks so much, Hayden.
My thanks again to Rynn and Ravi for joining us this week. Again, their Substack is called Signal Break, and we'll provide a link in the show notes. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Caden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstrom. Kimmy David designed our cover art. Convergence Magazine is a proud founding member of the Movement Media Alliance. And of course, if you like what you heard, please let us know. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, tell a friend, or rate and review the show wherever you listen. It helps us find new audience, and it means a lot, like this review from listener C-Stars. Caden's clear and cutting synopsis of the weekly news is invaluable, and then the content of each show helps me make sense of the moment we're in and gives me hope for where we're going. Block and Build is enjoyable, accessible, and essential. Thanks! And of course, if you'd like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/membership. Even a few bucks a month goes a long way to making sure our independent small team can continue to build a map for our movements. I hope this helps.